Hi, my name is Ben, this is Board Game Dad, and today we're talking about educational and enriching board games. Now, this list came as a request from some friends of mine who homeschool their children. They use a curriculum called Classical Conversations. Now, whether or not you homeschool, all of these games are excellent educational, enriching board games. However, there are a few things I want you to understand about the curriculum just so that you can understand how this list is organized. And I will put some additional links in the description in case you're extra interested. But the curriculum is split over 3 years, or 3 cycles, and each cycle is split into disciplines. So for this video, we're going to be focusing on year 2. And in the science discipline, there's a lot of material about the natural sciences, about ecology, pollution, and astronomy. And then in history, it's all European history. So it kind of goes back all the way to William the Conqueror and works its way up to World War II. Finally, let me be clear about what I mean when I say games that are educational and enriching, because I think for a game to be really educational, for it to really sink in, it has to be fun first. If it's a game that's designed to be educational first, it can seem a little cheesy and it can kind of be boring to people who are above the content level. So I'll give you an example. When my daughter was in kindergarten, we played a game called Zingo. Zingo's a great game. It uses very small words, and young readers learn how to sight read the words in order to create lines for bingo. It's a lovely game, but as soon as my daughter was in first grade, second grade, it very quickly got old because she had mastered the content. So games like Zingo, I am going to leave them off this list. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on games that have this timeless quality. They do have educational content, they are very enriching, but first and foremost, they're fun and engaging. That's what I'm going to be featuring on this list. But if you'd like to browse more educational board games and other topics, you can also check out theperfectboardgame.com. That's my personal web app where I've organized all of the games according to my editor's choice. So you can click on educational and you'll find all of the games on this list as well as all of the games on my other videos as I continue to add them. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about my recommendations for the sciences. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is all about natural sciences, ecology, pollution, and astronomy. So, the first game on this list is a game called Planet. In Planet, the objective of the game is to collect animal cards by making an attractive planet for them. And players are going to have a 3-dimensional polyhedron like this one, and they're going to attach these magnetic tiles to the planet in such a way that the different terrain types align. And then at the end of the round, after everybody's placed their magnetic tiles, they're going to be collecting animal cards like this one. The animal is going to go to the planet that satisfies the living conditions that it needs. So this game is all about animals and where they live. It's not a very informative game, but it is a very exciting game. It'll get children excited about animals, and it's also excellent for spatial reasoning. As you play the game, you're going to be constantly moving around your planet and looking at it from different angles and thinking about how these different faces border with each other. I have found this to be a very successful game with my daughter back when she was even 5 years old. So it was a lot of fun. If you want to take a look at that, the game Planet. The next game is a game called Rainforest City. Now, Rainforest City is a little bit more complicated than Planet. I'd say you can still play it with a child as young as 6 or 7 years old. And in this game, what you're doing is you're placing tiles in order to grow an ecosystem with different animals. And the really neat and educational quality about this game is that in order to score an animal, it has to belong in a region that has a complete food chain. So, for example, you can have a pangolin, which is on the cover of the box here, but it won't score you any points unless it's in a region with termites. And the termites won't score you any points unless they're in a region that has woody trees. So you need to have all three in order to score the pangolin. So this is going to have you thinking about how the regions are arranged on the table and how you're going to place animals so that every animal has the type of food that it needs to eat. Now, in this discipline, there's also a unit on pollution, and for this, I found a game that is even more sophisticated, but an excellent, excellent game if you want to talk about conservation and pollution. I'll show it to you. It's called The Spill. Now, The Spill says it's for ages 10 and up. I do think you could play it with younger players if they are accustomed to games that are a little bit more complicated. But what's happening in this game is you've got an oil spill, and there is a oil derrick in the middle of a board. The board represents the ocean. What you're doing is you're dropping dice. The dice are scattering, and where the dice land represents where the oil spills. So what you're trying to do is save wildlife and get them all cleaned up, as well as contain the oil spill. So it's an excellent game for the topic of pollution. It is cooperative, which is why I think this game can play well with younger players. As long as the game is cooperative, the players can be talking with their parents about what to do and what choices to make, and it can really be more of an educational experience as opposed to a competitive game. So that's called The Spill, and it is brand new. It just came out in 2022. Now, I've picked two games for the subject of astronomy. The first game is called The Search for Planet X. In The Search for Planet X, this is actually a logical deduction game. So if you've ever played kind of those grid puzzle games where you have logical hints and you're trying to eliminate certain possibilities in order to find a solution, that's really what's going on in this game. All of the hints have to do with the position of planets and stars, and what you're trying to do is deduce the location of planet X. So there's some great vocabulary in here. There's asteroids and meteors and planets. Dwarf planets are all part of this game. And there are some really neat mechanics. You've got the sky, which is rotating, but largely this game is not very rich in scientific facts. It's more a thematic game to get people interested in astronomy, but the puzzles themselves are very much about deduction, which is one of the reasons why I'm recommending the game. Not because it's so enriching with the science topic, but because it's an excellent logical reasoning game. That is The Search for Planet X. The other one is called Apollo. Now, Apollo is a cooperative game with two sides to it. There's mission control, and then there are the astronauts. And the objective of the game is to succeed in these missions, which are inspired by the Gemini and Apollo missions. Now, this is, at its core, really just a dice game. The astronauts are rolling dice. They're using the dice to make decisions about their mission objectives, and mission control is keeping track of the status of all of their systems. And if the systems are failing, they're trying to send signals to the astronauts so that they can improve the health of those systems. That communication, by the way, I think does a great job of embodying the challenges in the space programs in the mid-20th century. And then the mission objectives themselves have some excellent flavor text about things that actually happened on these missions. However, much like The Search for Planet X, the gameplay itself is more about the dice. So any scientific facts that are going to come from this game are going to come from the flavor text, and the gameplay is just largely a lot of fun. That is Apollo, NASA moon missions. So now we're going to move to games that fit into the history topic. Now, the first of these games is a game called Timeline. Timeline is a game that has multiple editions. The one that I'm going to recommend is the one called Events. And in Timeline Events, what you're doing is you're trying to play event cards on the table, but they have to be played in chronological order. So in the curriculum for classical conversations, I know that memorization is a really big skill that they try to emphasize. And so this is an excellent game if you want your children, if you want your students to memorize the dates of specific events, or if you look at some of the other editions of Timeline, inventions, or what have you. The next game is a game called Trekking Through History. Now, Trekking Through History has very minimal educational content in it. You have over 100 event cards. All of the cards have a description about what happened on the event in a year, and that's about all there is for the content. The objective of the game is to score points by collecting these cards and placing them in chronological order. So it is actually a very fun game with a lot of really innovative mechanics. I think this is probably one of the gamiest games that I've recommended so far. I mean, you would play this without even kids. It's just a good game, but it does have that nice element where you're looking at different events and ordering them according to their dates. Moving on from generic history games into things that are a little bit more specific, the next thing I want to talk about is warfare. Because throughout history there are a lot of wars, and in the world of board gaming there are a lot of war board games. The only problem with war board games in the world of board gaming is that they are very sophisticated, and the more effort the designers take to build in real life scenarios from history, the more complicated the game becomes. So, while I could have listed dozens of historical war board games, I'm not going to recommend any of the really dense ones because they're more for fanatics than for kids. However, I did find a game that I think is an excellent introduction to the kind of gameplay that's involved in a war game. So if your kids are young, like I'm even thinking 6 years old, you could get them started on a very simple, very short game that has them thinking about the mechanics involved in war. So really this is like an area control game, and you've got little troops that are spreading out. So this game is called 8-Minute Empire. It's not a very educational game, but it is very simple, and it only takes about 8 minutes to play. What's happening is you're picking up cards, and you're using those cards to recruit troops and spread them out across the different regions of the map in order to claim dominance and score points at the end of the game. And then collect resources according to whatever's on the card. It's very, very simple. You can play it very quickly, play it over and over again, and I think it's a great introduction into games that are going to involve area control, which is the biggest mechanic in war games. So, that being said, I'll make my next recommendation, which also kind of covers all of history. It's called History of the World. Now, History of the World is brilliant. If you've heard of the game Risk, imagine Risk if Risk was designed to be educational. Basically, what's happening is you're playing the game over several ages, and during each age, every player is going to be in control of some world power at that time in history. So in the beginning of the game, you might be controlling the Egyptians or the Babylonians or something. And as the game goes on, eventually you might be controlling the Vikings or the Huns or something like that. So you've got more and more of these world powers, and with each world power you get a special ability, and really the objective of the game is to spread out your people, build monuments, and erect buildings so that you can get victory points for scoring different regions of the world. So there's a little bit of competition, there's a little bit of warfare, and then you've got that dice rolling element to resolve warfare, just like Risk, but there's just so much more going on as you take cards to represent the world power that you're playing at that time in history. Excellent game, but it's not overly complex. I'd say you probably play it if you're about 9-10 years old. but much longer game, much more involved game. This is going to take a long time to play. The payoff, though, is that it's a lot more enriched with educational content there. So that's history of the world. The next game is about a specific period in history, the Crusades. And this is a game called Crusaders. Now, Crusaders says it's for ages 14 and up, but I don't think it's very complicated. And I think that if you've played a game like 8-Minute Empire, this is actually a very simple game, although it could get very strategic. It's just an excellent game, though, for the Crusades. What you're doing is each player is controlling an order of knights, and the rulebook has some excellent descriptions about these knights. You can see there's a lot of text there talking about their role in history and how their role in the game has been designed, and they are placing them at one position in Europe, and they're using action points to spread out across Europe, defeat and conquer infidels, and erect buildings. And you're getting a lot of points for that at the end of the game. It is an all-around excellent board game with a theme that is well designed for the topic of Crusades. Just be aware that this is something that you wouldn't want to play unless you're playing with kids that can handle a meaty board game. So that is Crusaders. Now the next game is for a topic in this curriculum called WWI Countries. So for learning WWI countries, I recommend a game called Imperial. Now Imperial takes place before World War I, when the different countries in Europe are trying to spread their influence in order to make more money. So you are an investor, you're buying bonds in these different countries, and when you buy many bonds in a country, you can control the country in order to build factories, to increase that country's power, to spread its influence, and essentially make more money. But during the course of this game, you're going to have conflict with the other bordering countries that are trying to accomplish the same thing. And so there will be alliances formed between players as this happens, as well as a shifting balance in where the economic strength is. And I think that's what makes this game especially unique, is it's not just about power and warfare, but economic strength. It really comes through, although in this game, instead of playing as a country, you are playing as an investor buying bonds in the country. So I think this is a very sophisticated game. I would not play it with kids that are younger than 10 even, and that is still pushing it. It's probably more for 12 and up. But it is an excellent game, and it really kind of is an excellent example of the challenge that I face when building this list, because in order to get a game that really has great content, it just becomes more complex. And this is one of those games with some of the best content thematically to support these lessons about how the world works, especially in that time period, but it is a more difficult game to approach. But the game is called Imperial. So now the next game is very exciting because it really checks all the boxes. It's full of rich historical content, and yet the game is simple without making any compromises on what you can learn from the game. It's called Memoir 44. And in Memoir 44, it is a 2-player game, so you're playing allies versus axes, and it's basically a card game. You're playing cards in order to move your troops around, but the rule set is very simple. What makes the game interesting, actually, are the different scenarios. So you have a setup book that will tell you how to set up a scenario and all of the special rules, as well as the objectives, which are all designed to mimic events in actual history. And you set up the scenario, and then you play your cards in order to play it out, and see how it goes. But I love this game because whereas the last several games I've mentioned, I've said are for older kids, this game you can really play with kids as young as 8, even though it's a war game. So I highly recommend you check this one out, Memoir 44, and I will leave more links in the description. Now the last topic for which I have a recommendation is the end of the Cold War. Now for this topic, there is a board game classic which I cannot recommend because it is just too complex. It's called Twilight Struggle. I'll leave links in the description if you want to look at it. It's great for adults. But there is a derivative of this game, a related game that I think really gets at the Cold War and gets a lot at what Twilight Struggle does so well. It's called 13 Minutes. So 13 Minutes is just about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and in this game, what it really does well is it does a lot of things well. You're playing cards. All of the cards have actual historical people and events on them, and when you play a card, it has two effects. One effect provides you a benefit, and the other effect can provide a benefit for your opponent. And so at every moment in this game, you're constantly weighing whether or not you can afford to play a card that's going to concede some ground to your opponent. There's a real tension in this game, and you're thinking, oh, if I do this, they could benefit in such a way, but what other option do I have? And I could try this or that. Like your every decision is very difficult in this game. It does an excellent job of reflecting the Cold War, and really what you're doing is you're removing and adding influence to different regions around Cuba. So Cuban Missile Crisis. There's some excellent content on the cards themselves, and then the gameplay itself really mimics that tension in the Cold War, if you want to take a look at that. Those are my recommendations for this academic year in classical conversations. So there are 2 more academic years full of content, which I hope to cover. You'll find links to those videos in the description below, as well as links to all of the other games that I've listed here. Don't forget to check out theperfectboardgame.com, where you can take a look at the editor's choice and browse these games, as well as even look up when they go on sale on Amazon. So all of that stuff is down below. Thank you so much for watching.